Welcome, everybody, and I'm excited to introduce the next speaker. I met Bamdad about 5 years ago at a Chris Perdue-led advocacy meeting, and we just happened to sit next to each other, and we started chatting, and I was highly interested in his business that's located over in Seaford, Delaware, as well as he has Maryland businesses on the staffing side. So with that, he speaks 5 languages, which I found very interesting, to speak 5 languages. He's also founded this business that's grown over the past 5 years. He employs, I think, 15-ish people in that business and a lot more in the Maryland businesses. So with that, I give you Bamdad Bahar.
Good morning. Good morning. I know I stand between you and lunch, so I'll try and be fast. There might be a few speakers after me, but I can start with a corny joke. What is Bruce Lee's vegetarian brother called? Broccoli. All right. I know, bad. I'm sorry. Kids told me that one. All right. All right. First of all, thank you, Carrie, for inviting me. Thank you for the Chamber giving me this opportunity. And I'm very proud to be here. And I've been part of the Eastern Shore community really for the past 28 years. I started investing down here, buying real estate, and while I was working at Gore, W.L. Gore and Associates, as an engineer, great company, also in Delmarva Peninsula. And I eventually ended up being a general manager of Teledyne Energy Systems in Baltimore. And when that unit got merged with another company, I had this option of staying or starting my own business, and my wife said, if you don't start your own business now, you never will. So that was 2001, about 6 months before 9/11, which was very exciting, being an Iranian on the Eastern Shore and a foreigner in all these small towns. And I started, I had a non-compete agreement, a 10-year non-compete agreement. So I started, I expanded the real estate business, which a lot of you folks know me for. And I opened up a whole number of commercial retail enterprises, neighborhood service centers, laundromats, got into staffing, got into just a whole series of service businesses, which I sold several years ago to concentrate on this venture that I'm in now called Xergy. And the background to all this, and my slide presentation, by the way, is all about the future of energy. But this company, Xergy, makes ion exchange membranes. We make the thinnest, strongest, most advanced, highest performance membranes in the world. This was technology that I was originally involved with at W.L. Gore. And you may not know this, but Delaware is a leading center for ionics. And you say, well, what is ionics? Well, it's not electronics. It's sort of the third leg of all the transformational and disruptive new technologies that are coming out. You have to sort of ask yourself, where would we be with cell phones if we didn't have batteries? And where would we be with electric vehicles if we didn't have batteries? And if the 20th century was this age of oil and this age of, and the latter part, age of electronics and computing and software, one of the things that hopefully you'll get out of my presentation is that the 21st century is going to be a transformation of energy as we know it. And there'll be a new field, a multi-trillion-dollar field of ionics, which is going to be emerging, and it's going to be very significant. And Delaware has 5 companies, 5 globally leading companies in this area. Gore, of course, where I worked, is a leader with a whole bunch of membrane technology that I was involved in, initially inventing and then helping start a new business unit for them. But DuPont, which is now Chemours, has a business unit in Afion. There's a company in Middletown called Ion Power, may not have heard of. There's a company in Newark called Bloom Energy. Who's heard of Bloom Energy? Any hands up? Okay. They went public last year for $2.2 billion. And of course, there's this little company down south called Xergy. All right, so we've been very lucky to have won about $10 million of DOE funding, and we're self-funded, we're not VC funded. And we've been very, very lucky to work with the University of Delaware, which is really one of the centers for this technology going forward. And we've partnered with the University of Delaware to win a number of DOE-related grants. And I'm not going to talk too much about our company because I don't want to bore you with ion exchange talk. But most of my presentation really is about the future of energy and the future of and how it's going to affect you and how you can play a part in this transformation that's going forward. So it's 8 slides. I'll try to get through them as quickly as I can. The presentation is called The Dawn of a New Energy Age. And let's start off with where we are now today, okay? Roughly speaking, it's the U.S. energy picture is 3 major uses: buildings, transportation, and industry. And roughly a third each, although buildings are really closer to 40% of total energy use. And of course, in terms of primary energy source, petroleum is huge, natural gas, coal, renewables, and nuclear. And this is going to change. This whole picture is going to change. So in the transportation sector, and this might be controversial saying this to you, but over the next 20 years or so, there's going to be a transformation of automobiles, and we're going to actually see almost a factor of 10 reduction in use in fossil fuels. Ethanol, of course, has been a big part of that. You know, we're up to, I think, now 15% allowance of ethanol as an oxygenate in fuels. But, you know, the Trump administration recently, there was a big news item that they canceled the efficiency standards for vehicles. And that's actually not 100% true. Yes, they did cancel the 2025 mandate, but the 2020 mandate still remains. And there may be another administration in Washington by 2025. So my point is that we're going to be looking at sort of a continuation of improvement in efficiency on vehicles, largely driven by hybridization. Some car companies, Volvo, you may know, has announced that they will not have anything but electric drivetrains turning wheels. They might have internal combustion engines producing electricity to run batteries or whatever, but there is going to be increasing hybridization. But also the other part of the picture that not a lot of people talk about is the intelligence, the amount of smart technology that's going to go into vehicles with increasing driverless operation. There was a fleet of trucks that Daimler-Benz ran across the U.S. last year, 10 of them from San Francisco to New York without a driver. So when people talk about workforce augmentation, we're going to see this increasingly being a fact. And, you know, and one thing that I think about is what are we going to do with the 5 million people in the United States that make a living driving things, not now, but over the next 20 years or so, and I think that's a critical issue. This is a trend, and it's a fact, and you know, and it's much more. The story is much larger than Tesla, and what a lot of you may not know is that even with current vehicles, there is a sort of secret hybridization going on with regenerative braking and supercaps being put in to augment batteries. There's actually a lot of hybridization going on without us even really being aware of it in existing vehicle stock as it's being developed. Okay, in the building sector, it's going to be similar. The buildings are also going to get incredibly smarter. The real story here has been that there's been massive improvement in the efficiency of appliances. And the big one, of course, everybody's, I'm sure, aware of is lighting, what's happened in sort of with lighting. But also, you take things like clothes dryers, refrigerators. I mean, refrigerators today have about 1/5 of the energy footprint that they had, 20 years ago. And this is only going to continue. And if you've been in most builder supply stores, you probably will have seen these Nest thermostats. There's also Ecobee. There's a whole bunch of them out there in the marketplace. but there's going to be a lot more intelligence embedded in building stock. And then there's also going to be a lot of hybridization. I don't know if you know, but if you buy a hot water heater that has more than 80 gallons of electric hot water heater with more than 80 gallons capacity, they're now by regulation hybridized. So there's a heat pump above the hot water heater, and they use about 60% less energy than a typical electric hot water heater. And this is going to happen to clothes dryers. This is going to happen to a lot of other areas. So there's also sort of this trend of smartness and hybridization in home appliances, which is sort of an emerging trend. And it's actually a trend that we at Xergy are very happy about, because we're developing the most advanced, most efficient compressor technology to go into these devices. So, and then the next part of the energy picture is the grid. And the picture on the far left side is called a duck curve. And how many of you have seen a duck curve? Hands up? Okay. So what's happening is people are putting, so buildings are getting more energy efficient, and in some jurisdictions in California, I read this week, people are being mandated to, for new housing construction, to add solar panels and essentially have net zero buildings. And this is, I think, going to carry through across the country eventually over the next 20 years. But as people add more and more and more renewable capacity, whether it's wind or solar, the daytime production for utility companies, the requirement for that becomes diminished. And there's that chart there shows sort of the curve over the next, if you will, 10, 15 years. And utilities are panicking because they have this huge surge in demand at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, but during the day, they're actually having to produce a lot less electricity. And what they really like is good, steady energy production going forward. And one of the reasons why people believe that ionics and this whole field is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar business is because in order to deal with this issue, with the duck curve issue, energy storage is going to become a very, very, very critical component of sort of the energy picture. And whoever has the cheapest, best battery system or storage system that can save energy and keep that load production constant and then provide it when people need it is going to be sort of a big winner going forward. So in order to deal with all this, what grids are doing is they're becoming a lot smarter. And there's going to be a lot of asset sharing. And there's going to be little devices on your hot water heater, for example, that'll allow a utility to switch it off or use it as storage, have it run and produce hot water during the day so that they use them, if you will, like batteries. But cars are going to be integrated with the grid. Heat pumps are going to be integrated with the grid. And there's companies out there now. One example that I've been looking at recently is a company called Energy Hub out of New York, where they're coming to people's homes and they're trying to get them to sign up with them so that they can take control of your hot water heater and heat pump. And Google's already doing this. Nest is a division of Google, and they'll give people like $50 a year or something if you allow remote access to your thermostat at home. So this is kind of really, really interesting. What's happening basically is that the most valuable energy resource is going to be data. It's not going to be oil, it's not going to be natural gas, but it's going to be data. And there was a picture on the front page of The Economist, I think a couple of years ago, where they had oil rigs with Google and Apple signs and whatever. But this is actually the future of energy, is all this intelligence, artificial intelligence, and smartness going into these devices. And if you look at stock valuations and you look, the revenues for Apple and Google are essentially very, very similar to ExxonMobil or Gazprom in Russia, in terms of revenues. But in terms of valuation, these companies are worth almost 3 to 5 times what a comparable oil company with the same revenues would be. So these are incredible. The markets are telling you that this is the future and this is what's happening. And I also put a picture in there of what I call the technology triad: software, electronics, and ionics, kind of going forward. And anyway, the net result of all this, okay, is that while the U.S. population is going to grow, and there's going to be more interest, more industry, more activity in the United States, U.S. energy use will stay largely flat, which is in the middle. But global energy demand is going to grow almost exponentially. And that's a huge issue. That's a big deal. These oil companies, American oil companies, if you will, our American oil companies, are going to basically behave like tobacco companies. They'll have a minimal, business footprint in the United States, but they'll be doing a lot of business overseas. And that's really a big issue from a political standpoint, foreign policy standpoint. But it's the future. And U.S. I don't know if you folks know or not, but U.S. is now a net exporter of energy. We are the Saudi Arabia now of oil, and U.S. is going to become probably the world's largest exporter of oil and gas and energy over the next decade or so. Oil policy and energy policy is going to be pivotal to the future of this country, and that's a really big deal. And while all this is happening and we're net exporters and the global energy demand is increasing, there is one other fact that's going to affect everything, and that is the stress that our planet is facing, whether climate change, et cetera, due to use of fossil fuels. And that's another critical issue that we're going to have to face going forward. So my last slide, really, my big point, okay, is that efficiency is everything. And each and every one of us has a role to play in the future of energy going forward. And efficiency is really at the core of almost every decision that we make as a society, as individuals, as a country. And efficiency plays into so many different aspects of energy going forward, energy policy going forward, that it's really sort of, if you start enumerating them, you'll find that this is really at the heart of decision-making, policy, behavior, everything. We're very lucky on the Eastern Shore that we have a poultry industry, because you may know or may not know, but of all the protein conversion that goes on, chicken, poultry is among the most efficient converters of energy, have one of the lowest carbon footprints. Cows, beef, are even worse than cars. And you may think that's a secondary issue, not important, but it will be an issue going forward, and it's going to be a very fundamental issue. But as we promote efficiency, that means that we're going to be employing more and more smart devices going forward, and that's going to play into technology. As we employ efficiency, we're going to increase U.S. exports, because the less energy, oil and gas we use, the more we're going to have to be able to export. As we provide efficiency, one thing you may not have quite appreciated about the whole concept of efficiency is that it's creating or building or integrating a more efficient system is like basically finding oil or finding gold. Efficiency is replacing resources, okay? And that's a very fundamental concept of how important efficiency is. It's discovering ways to do things more efficiently is the equivalent of producing cash, producing money, okay? Very, very important concept. And I also want to say that, if somebody comes knocking on your door and saying, can we put solar panels in your house or, wind turbine or whatever, that's a great idea. If you have the money, go ahead and do it. But one thing I want to stress to everybody, that there's a lot of higher return, lower hanging fruit opportunities in your homes, in your factories, in your offices to become more efficient, that produce much higher rates of return on investment than putting solar panels on. And I'm not saying don't do that. Please do that if you want to do that. But there's a lot of ways, if you really spend the time to look at it, there's a lot of ways to get very high return, more efficient appliances and stuff in your homes. And you should be looking at that. That's a very, very important part of our future. So bottom line, the enemy of our future is inefficiency. And that's where we need to invest our time. And you guys need to be early adopters of a lot of the new technology, and everything that you can do, each of you can do, can have a massive impact collectively on the future of our country, the future of our society. Thank you.